Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this webinar. It's brought to you by NERC and NEWMOA. It's about anaerobic digestion and other solutions for wasted food. I'm Megan Schultz-Fontes, and I'm the Executive Director of Northeast Recycling Council. Before we get started, I'd like to review some housekeeping details. Please note that this webinar is being recorded. Recording will be available on both NERC's website as well as NEWMOA's website after the webinar. And we will also upload a copy of the presentations and any resources included as well. We will send an email out with the link to those resources following the webinar, most likely tomorrow. If you have any questions for the presenters, please use the chat box to enter them. And after the speaking and the presentation section of the webinar, we will get to those questions. We have three excellent presenters this afternoon. First, we have Stephanie Frisch, Project Manager at NEWMOA. Then we have Mary Ann Remolador, Assistant Director at NERC. And then we'll hear from John Fay, Project Manager at NEWMOA. And following that, we will open it up for Q&A. So without further ado, I will kick it off to Stephanie Frisch.
Thank you, Megan. I want to start off with this project is an EPA-funded project that is meant to support state and local government programs that seek to use anaerobic digestion to increase their food waste diversion rates through the development of guidance and training on environmental justice engagement and regulatory compliance. In this first webinar, we will discuss different solutions for eliminating wasted food from landfills, and during subsequent webinars, we will highlight our three published materials. First, a regulatory guide, which provides information on air, water, solid waste, and environmental justice permitting requirements for new construction of anaerobic digestion facilities, accepting food waste in the 11 Northeast states. The second one being a best practices for community engagement guide, which provides information to anaerobic digestion facilities to understand best practices engaging with communities that they are looking to site and operate AD in, as well as understand the importance of environmental justice considerations. And the third is a What's AD and How Can I Get Involved roadmap, which is to help residents and community members understand what AD is and what their rights in the siting process of AD facilities are. Next slide, please.
And just give me a minute. There you go.
Thank you. So what is wasted food? Wasted food is an overarching term to describe food that was not used for its intended purpose and is managed in a variety of ways, including donation, animal feed, composting, anaerobic digestion, and lastly, landfill or combustion facilities. The EPA uses the term wasted food because it conveys that it is still a valuable resource that is being wasted, whereas food waste implies that food is no longer of value and it needs to be managed as waste. Next slide. This is the EPA wasted food scale. It prioritizes actions that prevent and divert wasted food from disposal. As you can see, there are preferred ways such as preventing wasted food from the beginning. However, there are other ways for disposal such as donation, upcycling, feeding animals, leaving it unharvested, composting, and anaerobic digestion. The most preferred pathways offer the most benefit to the environment, communities, and to the circular economy, and this project primarily focuses on anaerobic digestion. There are many benefits to preventing wasted food. First is less or no food in the trash means that there's less food to pay for, or less trash to pay for and manage. Trash is lighter and cleaner, which benefits the landfill. And there's also reduced greenhouse gas emissions from landfill due to the reduced amount of organics in the landfill itself. Second is consumers save money. By reducing food waste, there are fewer purchases that need to be made and less waste management costs as well. And third, fewer wasted resources. Food requires land, water, energy, labor, manufacturing, packaging, and transportation to get to our tables. By reducing food waste, reducing wasted resources, and in turn also reducing the greenhouse gas emissions from this wasted food. Next slide, please. And also we want to highlight that date labels don't necessarily equal safety. This misunderstanding leads to a lot of wasted food. There's actually only one federal date label requirement, and it's for baby formula. There are other state date label requirements, and they vary by state. For example, Connecticut state law requires that there are date labels on dairy products, whereas New Hampshire state law only regulates date labels on prepackaged sandwiches. These dates are determined by manufacturers for their guaranteed top quality. However, most foods are safe to eat and still top quality well after these labeled dates. For example, yogurts and cheeses often last a week or more. Eggs last 3 or more weeks, and canned and boxed goods also last 3 or more months. There's lots of other foods that are also safe after these dates, and we recommend using the look and smell test to determine if food is still good to eat.
Second on the EPA wasted food scale is food donations. And food donations are crucial in addressing food insecurity within the country. Feed America estimates that there are more than 80 million tons of food wasted in the US per year. Food donations can happen at many different levels, whether it's you and me bringing our canned and non-perishable items to a local food drive, or a grocer or restaurant donating their food to local food banks and soup kitchens, and wholesalers and manufacturers possibly donating unsold or unused food to different food rescue operations. Many people get very scared when they start thinking about donating food because they're afraid that if something happens with the food and someone gets sick from it, they may be held liable. There is federal liability protection for food donations through the Bill Emerson Good Samaritan Food Donation Act, and this was passed in 1996. There are two primary criteria that this law requires: that the donor must donate apparently wholesome food or fit grocery product, and that the donations must be made in good faith. In other words, if someone is found to have donated food that they were aware was already bad, then you're not protected by this law. So you have to stick to those two criteria. We have also at the end of this PowerPoint a one-page resource list, and you can find more information about the Good Samaritan law within those resources. The other part about food donations that's so important is making sure that you adhere to food safety guidelines. These are state requirements, and they may differ from state to state. So when donating food, it's best to check with the entity accepting the food donations for their requirements. But you can also find out more general state requirements through the Department of Health. And I also want to point out one of the resources we have in our list too is this Harvard Food Law and Policy Clinics survey, where they have information about 50 states' food donation requirements. Once food can no longer be used for people, another option is to use our wasted food for animal feed. And this is the next level on EPA's food scale, so the third level. This practice of using human food to feed animals has been around for centuries around the world. It was drastically affected in the 1980s when there was an outbreak of international diseases that affected primarily cows and pigs. Since then, in the US, we have federal and state laws now restricting certain food waste from being fed to animals. And again, each state is different. At the same time, now people are, I would say, the interest to use food waste for animals, the interest in that is increasing, and more people are taking note that there's a lot of safe, healthy food that we waste that could be used for animal feed. So there's I would say, a growing movement to make that happen. And the fact that it's on EPA's wasted food scale is a really good sign. There are environmental benefits to using human food for animals. It reduces the burden on agriculture, where the amount of feed to be grown is lessened, which reduces the amount of water used and preserves arable land. It also avoids methane, which would otherwise have been produced if the food waste had been put in landfills. Some examples of how food waste is or could be used for animal feed include Rutgers University. They gather or collect the food from their dining halls. They pulverize it, separate out the liquids from the solids. Then they store the solids for a local farmer, like 15 miles away from their main campus, who collects that food waste for his pigs. He charges Rutgers $30 to collect the material, which is a bargain for Rutgers because they would otherwise have spent $60 per ton if it had gone to a landfill. Another example is World Wildlife Fund has completed a study on how bakery byproducts could potentially be used for chicken feed. And what they found is that the bakery byproducts was a very nutritional food for chickens, and due to the lessened impact on the environment, it actually makes it an extremely viable option.
And then next on the EPA wasted food scale is composting. Composting is an aerobic process that converts organic material into nutrient-rich and biologically available amendments to soil. Composting is beneficial because it removes the food from trash, which again leads to it being lighter and cleaner and allows for the organic material to be processed in another way. And then composting also preserves the nutrients from the food that would otherwise have been wasted, and it allows it to be returned to the soil, which reduces the need for chemical fertilizer and creates that circularity of the nutrients from the soil before. And also because it is an aerobic process, methane producing microbes are not active during this type of decomposition, which reduces the greenhouse gas load from decomposing organics. And it also removes food waste from landfills, which reduces methane gas generation for the reason listed above. Moisture, which reduces the quantity of leachate from landfill and leachate management. It also reduces the attraction of unwanted wildlife and the quantity of gases that require management at landfills.
Hi, my name is John Fay, and I'm going to now take you through the basics of anaerobic digestion. Thank you, Marianne and Stephanie, for getting us through the more preferred parts of the wasted food scale. And now we're going on to anaerobic digestion. Next slide, please.
John, I also wanted to tell you that you became a little garbled just now.
Oh, maybe I can switch my microphone if need be.
Good right now, John.
Okay. All right, let me know if it's a problem and I'll switch my microphone. So I'm going to walk through why we would use anaerobic digestion, even though it's low on the wasted food scale, and the basics of how anaerobic digestion works, types of AD facilities that exist, and opportunities where food waste could fit in to this sort of management. Next slide, please. So why would we use anaerobic digestion? Well,
John,
yeah.
you're garbled again. I'm not
All
sure if it's the movement thing or not.
All right, I'm going to switch to a different microphone. Can you hear me now?
Affirmative.
Okay, let's see if this one works better. Although reduction is always the best process for keeping wasted food out of the landfill and not wasting other resources, there will always be waste generated somehow or another. You can't eat orange peels, that sort of thing. So we have to have ways to deal with it. And one benefit of anaerobic digestion is these facilities can be on a pretty small footprint, and they can even fit into urban settings. And as a location in an urban setting, also it fits into the existing infrastructure for waste management, which is essentially sending out a truck, collecting material, and bringing it to a consolidation facility. So AD fits into that paradigm. Also, in anaerobic digestion, you can have processes that's all enclosed for good odor control. And lastly, it does recover some of the energy that is still in the wasted food. Next slide, please. So what are the climate impacts of AD versus other ways of handling food waste? Well, the process is when organic material breaks down, it's eaten by microbes, and microbes release gases in their respiration. And there are some microbes that work in an aerobic environment and some in an anaerobic environment. And that just means, is there oxygen there? So aerobic would be with oxygen, and anaerobic would be without oxygen, and very different ecosystems arise in each different situation. In an anaerobic situation, one of the byproducts of the respiration of these microorganisms is methane. And methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, especially in the short run. So it can be many times, 25, 60, depending how you measure it, times stronger a greenhouse gas than carbon dioxide. And the point is, if food gets to a landfill, it is, the landfill is an environment where there is no oxygen, and once it's packed in, and therefore it's an anaerobic system, and therefore methane is being generated in the landfill. And although landfills can capture that methane, and most do at this point, the process of filling a cell and capping it and putting in the gas collection system takes long. It takes some time. So by the time that gets done and methane is being captured, most of the releases from food waste has already been generated methane and been released to the atmosphere. Next slide, please. So this is a real quick schematic about a very basic wet anaerobic digestion system. So on the left, you see your feedstock is a slurry of some kind, high in biological oxygen demand, ready to be broken down by microorganisms, full of good organic material. It enters a sealed container, and the oxygen is used up in that sealed container, and therefore it becomes an anaerobic process. Microbes in the mix will release gases, and the biogas, which is
released will be collected at the top. And the digestate is the solid or semi-solid material that is left that you can take off the bottom. Next slide, please. This diagram is from the US EPA, and it is an excellent way to show how many different materials could go into anaerobic digestion and the materials that come out of it. So there's two main byproducts, biogas and digestate. Biogas is mostly methane and some carbon dioxide and some other trace gases. It can be used as a fuel as is. It can be burned in an on-site generator or a heater, anything like that. And it can be cleaned and piped into a natural gas pipeline to supplement the natural gas. Digestate is kind of like a compost product, but it has lots of nutrients and organic matter still in it that could be used. It can be spread onto fields, almost like a manure spread. It can be dried and used as animal bedding. There are lots of uses for this rich product. Next slide, please. So is this happening in the US? Yes, it's happening in a lot of places. One of the most common places is at water resource recovery facilities, or POTWs, or there's lots of different names for it. Basically, the sewage plant. And in the process of cleaning the water, they generate biosolids, and the biosolids can be anaerobically digested to produce some of the biogas and further process the material. Another very common use is on farm. A lot of farms have anaerobic digesters for their manure systems. And what we're focusing on a lot in this webinar is the standalone facilities. That would be a separate facility that may be made for a particular purpose, like at a dairy, maybe they have a lot of organic waste that they need to handle, and they could actually make a digester right on their site. Or a company could, or municipality could build an anaerobic digestion facility, collect material from small businesses and residents, and digest it there at that site. Next slide, please. The US EPA did a study on anaerobic digesters that are using food in their feedstock. And they surveyed a whole bunch of facilities and confirmed that it is happening all over the place. Given their estimates, I would say that probably there are at least 200 anaerobic digestion facilities in the US that are accepting food waste to some degree. Next slide, please. So what are the types? There's lots of different aspects that could be changed and still have a successful anaerobic digestion facility. You can have a single input, or you can do co-digestion. That's just basically, are you just doing one material, or are you mixing things together? For instance, in this first picture, that's an anaerobic digester on a farm that also accepts food scraps in a slurry. So they're co-digesting the manure and the food scraps. Then you can think about how to build your facility in terms of, are you doing a batch or are you doing a continuous flow? The diagram I showed earlier is more of a continuous flow where it's piped in and then mixed together, and then it pipes out at the end. It's kind of like a long continuous process. Whereas in this picture here with these big pink doors, this is a batch process. You would load a bay, close it up, let it do its thing, and then pull it out. So we've got continuous flow or batch. We also have wet or dry. I keep throwing around the word slurry. So a slurry would be in a wet digestion system, and that would be less than 20% solids. You can also have dry systems that are more than 20% solids or even higher. And that could be it, like in the picture with the pink doors there. And you can have different levels of heat that you're using in the facility. So there's thermophilic and mesophilic bacterial cultures or microorganisms. And so very hot ones are called thermophilic, and that is the most common because it also has the added benefit of killing pathogens. Next slide, please. So where can we put this wasted food into the anaerobic digestion system? Well, we can add it as a co-digestion feedstock at existing facilities. So if there's already anaerobic digestion facilities that are handling a certain material, we can talk with the operators and see if they're looking for more feedstock and if wasted food could be something that could be included into their system. Or we could build more standalone facilities. Municipalities or private businesses could construct a facility and look for a waste shed to bring in organic waste from the local area. And also companies and industry that are dealing with a lot of food, manufacturing it, processing it, anything like that, they may generate waste in their process. And so having an on-site digester is another way that they might be able to handle their food waste material. Next slide, please. Okay, I guess that wraps up my very quick overview of how anaerobic digestion works. I have to add the caveat that I'm not an expert, but I'm hoping that gave you a pretty good idea of how it all fits together and what the process looks like.
We've mentioned a little bit about this resource list, so I just wanted to show you. It's the last page of the presentation.
And these slides will be uploaded again to NERC and NEWMOA's websites following this webinar. And we will email everyone with a link to that resource when that's available, which hopefully will be tomorrow or the following day by the end of this week. So now we'd love to open it up to the questions we've already received in the chat. And I'll begin with, is there a chart that shows how much longer a food is safe to eat beyond the use by sell-by date? So I don't know if Stephanie, you've seen anything on
Yeah, I
that.
can take that question. I have not seen anything yet. I have referenced our practice of this is one, trying to reduce waste, and two, from the USDA website about food product dating and information regarding that dating and how it is just determined by manufacturers rather than actually being regulated. So that was why we recommend that, but I have not seen a chart, no.
Okay, thank you. And then it looks like there was some questions on the bakery food byproducts for chickens, which Marianne did answer in the chat. That is also in the resource list. Does anyone have, let's see. Someone asked about if there are thoughts on dehydrators that folks use to compost their food waste. Has that come up in anyone's research? Okay. If we have information on that, we will send it out. And that could be a question that was asked to people that are in attendance, not necessarily for a speaker. What about the impact of micro and nanoplastics for AD facilities that have depackaging?
Yes, maybe I can take that a little bit. I mean, basically what goes in, what comes out of an anaerobic digestion facility. So that could be a concern. And I know there are a lot of states that are looking into microplastics as well as other contaminants that stick around like PFAS. So it is a concern, and states are grappling with how to regulate that. And the safety concerns, there's just so many unknowns of the micro and the nanoplastics that it's something to be watched, I would say. And especially in aerobic digestion, if you're doing depackaging, there's lots of different ways to depackage, and some of them are going to pulverize the material more, and others are going to allow for more removal. It's all going to be different. And we do have in our third webinar, we have some facilities that are coming to speak, so they might be able to speak more to that.
Yeah, and along those lines, someone else was asking how much PFAS is being found in the digestate produced by AD. So that would be interesting to see if they can answer any, if they have any numbers around these important questions.
Right, and that's really tough, because what is a lot of PFAS is also a very big question. Levels of safety are from 0 up to 100 ppm. That there's lots of different. It's like, what are we measuring it against is a concern for PFAS. I don't know of any myself of any results, so that will be interesting to see if the facilities are testing for that.
Absolutely. Can municipal yard waste be used in AD facilities? And that one I'm not totally.
Yeah, I believe so. I mean, well, especially in a dry system, it would be easier to use. The woody material would be hard in a slurry sort of system, in a wet system, but leaves could be added with soup, food waste, or such things. Anything that was organic really could end up, if you have it in the right form for that facility.
And then this question, again, might be better for webinar 3, which is what are new technologies that can turn liquid digestate into fertilizers, unless you can speak to any of that, John.
No, I'm afraid, like I said, I'm no expert, so
yeah.
That's.
So this is an interesting one. I've been hearing for years that manure AD units don't want food waste because it decreases the value of the gas credits coming from California. Can you speak to this? Is there any effort to change this and make food waste gas as appealing as manure gas?
Oh,
that's a hard question.
That's a hard one, and I believe it's going to be different state by state, depending on what sort of incentives and and even is your farm generating electricity for use in the grid, or is it just for local use on the farm or for heat? So I really think you'd have to look state by state and case by case on that one, but maybe it'll come up at the other webinar.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, what we can tell you all too, who are some of these questions might be better served for the future speakers of this 4-part series, all focused on anaerobic digestion regulation and environmental justice. And so what we can do is take these questions into account as we are arranging for the others, and just see if the speakers can speak to any of these questions in the future sessions. When is AD a better option than aerobic composting, and vice versa? Is that something that
I can speak a little bit on this? I would say that it depends on what you have in your area. A lot of the time there are different opportunities in different areas, and keeping food waste out of landfill is the main objective. So if there's less transportation costs associated with bringing food to an AD facility than a farther composting facility, AD may be more beneficial in that sense. In terms of beneficial for the environment. I would say that composting is still more beneficial because there is methane produced by AD facilities, even if it is captured. So trying to stay higher up on the EPA wasted food scale is always more beneficial, but any wasted food kept out of landfills is always more beneficial than not.
Thank you, Stephanie. Have we gotten a sense from this project yet on how many AD facilities exist?
I can tell you from the research that we've done, we've identified 47 AD facilities in the 11 Northeast states who are accepting food waste. And that's what our criteria we were looking at.
Thank you. This next question is something that we do have one of the next webinars of the 4 focusing on, but maybe one of you can touch on it a little bit. How do these facilities fit into existing zoning regulations? Are zoning regulation amendments necessary?
Well, I can speak to our regulatory guide focuses on air, water, solid waste, and environmental justice regulations. We did not specifically look at zoning. We looked at their statewide fact sheets, so our limitations are that there are likely more regulations that are going to impact the AD facility permitting requirements for that state that we did not go into, such as different areas outside of the 4 topics we covered, as well as any local municipality regulations and permits required. We did not go into that. So we don't have specific answers in terms of zoning, but those are the topics covered in our regulatory guide.
Thanks, Stephanie. This one, maybe John, you touched on it a bit. If the methane from AD is captured, why does it make it more problematic than composting, which also does produce methane?
Right. Composting produces less methane because at least the attempt is to make it an aerobic system. So it's going right out as heat and carbon dioxide. And essentially, in a perfect system, all the methane would be collected and then burned, which would then release it as carbon dioxide in an anaerobic digester. So, yeah, it's really kind of 6 one, half dozen the other. You're still going to end up with carbon dioxide. Either you're going to be able to capture that heat energy from the methane in an anaerobic digester, or you're going to lose it in a composting facility. It's just that energy is mostly going away, being lost to the microbial activity, unless you're capturing the heat somehow from a composting facility. But there is, there could be leaks and things like that, but that's the case at a compost facility too. You're going to have some methane generated in anaerobic pockets, that sort of thing. I would also say that although anaerobic digestion does capture that energy through the methane production, it is much, much less energy than has been used to get the food to that place. So that's why the wasted food scale puts avoiding wasted food and other items on the scale way above anaerobic digestion, because the earlier in the process that you stop the waste, the more energy you're saving. So, maybe 20% of the energy that's inherent in food is being captured at a perfect anaerobic digestion facility. So it's something, but it's much better to stop the food from being wasted in the first place.
Do you know if things like oyster shells, cat litter, or cooking oil is accepted?
I kind of doubt most facilities would want that sort of material because a lot of it is inert. It'll just be in there, cause trouble in their process. Well, cooking oils, that'd be great, but the shells and the kitty litter.
Yeah. Did you come across a study or chart that compares the GHG emissions produced by the amount of food waste in composting versus AD versus landfilling? Anything that compares the GHG emissions across the board? That's a good question. We can get back to that one.
Yeah, the EPA's WARM model would try to capture that, but that's a very complicated. They don't. It's case by case. It doesn't come out with a table that tells you that perfectly. But I bet someone's made that comparison at some point.
Yeah, and then definitely we could look at the EPA WARM tool, or EPA emission factors page, which I believe the direct link is input into the chat. Will future parts of this series discuss grant funding opportunities for purchasing or leasing AD systems?
Not directly, no. We will talk about in the second webinar the different requirements for siting an AD facility, but funding opportunities will likely not be discussed during that webinar.
Certainly, if we are able to collect that information, that would be a good addition. How does co-digestion affect what the digest state can be used for?
That's a tough one. I kind of feel like most digestate is the use for it is widespread. There's lots of different ways you can use digestate. So each facility is going to have a different plan for how to use it. And if you have food waste in there, it's probably not going to make a huge difference on what your digestate looks like, it just depends on the volumes of the different materials coming in and exactly what it is. So I think developers of anaerobic digestion facilities need to look ahead at exactly, are they going to have a single feedstock? Are they going to have co-digestion? And does that fit with their process? And does that fit with their uses of the digestate in the end? And then there's testing also of the digestate for certain uses. So it's really hard to give a discrete answer because they're all so different.
Thank you. Is anyone aware of a small rural transfer station that has a standalone anaerobic digester?
I've never seen one that small. There's a group that are doing micro digesters with for grocery stores. And I forgot the name of them. Does anyone else on the team remember those micro digester folks? They put it in a sea container and you can have it at at your site and digest food that way. I mean, that's something that a transfer station could do as well. I would think more transfer stations would send it to another facility or compost it, because that's just a much easier technology.
Thank you. We have lots of good resources in the chat, so we'll make sure to capture all of this and include it in our email out to all of the registrants here for this session. So we have about 15 minutes left. there are a few other questions that, again, we're keeping track of for the future sessions because we want to make sure that we get this information out in the future sessions to you all, if we're not able to answer them directly right now here. So another question I have is, what happens to any contaminants in the feedstock, John?
But most contaminants will be there in the digestate in the end, unless they are organic in nature and that can break down during the process. So it depends on your definition of contaminant. Like if woody particles were a contaminant, maybe a lot of them will break down, maybe they won't. If you're talking about something that's persistent, like PFAS substances, then those are likely not going to break down during the process. I mean, it is, many days, sometimes even months of high heat in the process most of the time. So a lot of things will break down. There's a lot of organic activity going on. They can even break down some substances that you wouldn't think would break down. But in the end, if it's a persistent material, what goes in has to come out. It's not like a pyrolysis or anything like that that's actually breaking down materials into elementary things.
Right. And then Marianne, what type of foods can be donated?
It depends on what food rescue operations or organizations are in your area, but it can range from any non-perishable item that can sit on a shelf for a while, as long as they're still good. And but it could also include fresh produce coming from the fields after they've been harvested. Gleaners go out and pick up the vegetables that are still in the field. They are oftentimes donated to food banks or food kitchens for use. But you also can donate eggs, milk, meats. It really depends on what your food rescue operation can deal with in your local area.
Thank you. And Stephanie, one question for you as well. Can you explain the differences between the sell by, use by, and best by terms that we find on food packaging?
Absolutely. So best if used by is really to indicate when a product will be of best flavor and best quality. It's not necessarily a purchase or safety date. The sell by date is to tell the store how long to display the product for inventory management. Again, it's not technically a safety date or regulated. The use by date is for the last date it's recommended of use for the product for peak quality. It is not a safety date, and it's only a safety date for infant formula per federal regulation. Again, it's just about peak quality. And then a freeze by date can be on certain products to indicate when a product should be frozen by and maintain peak quality. Freezing items are a great way to extend these dates as well, because different microbes can't grow in the freezer. So by putting it in the freezer, it preserves the food for a while. And also when it's pulled back out of the freezer, it can be eaten for, again, a certain amount of time, because those microbes will come back to life.
Thank you. Does anyone know how long it takes to completely digest material using AD and how that compares with composting?
AD is usually a quicker process than composting. I've read some do it in about 20 days. Anaerobic digestion could be 20 days, could be 40 days, something like that. Whereas most composting takes 3 to 12 months, depending on the system. So it's a quicker process, but a lot of AD facilities also run the material through their AD process, and then they actually compost the digestate on site to further break it down and make it into a more usable product. So they kind of, it's kind of an accelerated front end to do the digestion, and then you can compost from there. So AD is faster.
Thank you. Another question for you, John. As an energy source, how efficient is AD for recovering the energy in wasted food?
Well, like I mentioned before, you're not recovering all the energy that went into that food. And it depends how you use the methane at the end. If you have to clean it before you use it, that's going to reduce its efficiency overall, but highly increase its efficiency in the burn system. So I think I would have to defer to the experts in the following webinars, and in terms of how they're using the gas and if that is highly efficient. I know some have generators right on site, so they're just burning it in like an engine, a gas engine. So how efficient is that depends on the model and all that. I'm sorry, I don't have a more definitive answer for that. But I found the name of that small, the micro digester group. They're called Ecotone Renewables.
Great.
So I think they're out of Pennsylvania, if memory serves.
Ecotone.
Yeah, renewables.
Excellent, thank you. Stephanie, can you speak to any other ways that you can prevent wasted food at home? Going back to sort of the first hierarchy in EPA's wasted food scale.
Yeah, just to speak a little bit to preventing wasted food, since we didn't speak to it in our presentation. There's a lot of ways to prevent wasted food, such as preparing meals that you know you're going to enjoy and consume, so that you're interested in eating the food that you prepare. You can make lists each week of leftover food items in the household that you can use to plan meals around, so that they don't go bad in the next week, since they are older food items. You can also include quantities on shopping lists, so that you're realistic about the amount of food that you can eat in a time period. And you can also determine what quantities can be consumed, maybe avoiding to buying in bulk if you know that it is a perishable item that you won't be able to eat as fast as if you bought a smaller quantity. That also saves money in the long run, because even though bulk is cheaper in terms of quantity, it's not always cheaper in terms of how much food you can eat for the time allowed for it before it goes bad. Also making sure to properly store fruits and vegetables to maximize freshness, whether that's in humidity drawers in the fridge, or keeping certain fruits away from other vegetables and fruits that off gas when they're ripening. You can also make sure to cook your food and freeze it if you're afraid of it going bad in the coming days, that you won't have time to consume it. And really utilizing your freezer. As mentioned before, freezing is a great way to lengthen the time that you can eat your food. So really focusing on those ways and preventing food waste from the beginning, rather than asking yourself, what should I do with my wasted food?
Thank you. Is there a database that shows how digestate from anaerobic digesters is used, or that shows the quantity produced? I feel like the answer is not that we've seen, but that's a great idea. Certainly something we'll also carry through to the next sessions to see if anyone is working on such a project currently. There was another question that I think maybe just as a, final overview, what are the advantages of using an anaerobic digester compared to an industrial composting site?
I guess basically, the EPA has placed it slightly lower on the wasted food scale than composting because of many reasons. But when would you want to use it is because it has a smaller footprint usually than a large composting facility. Or if you have a particular use for biogas at that site. There are, I can't really think of any other really good reasons, unless you're already getting in a slurry and it's too wet to compost. It's just the differences in the processes may lend itself to anaerobic digestion based on your material and your location. Generally, though, composting is more preferred. But AD comes in close with, especially if you're using the digestate in a good beneficial use.
Thank you.
I saw a question about dehydrators, a couple questions, and I just would also second that dehydrators are not anaerobic digesters and they are not composters. They may have their use, but it's not breaking down the material. So you'd still need to do further to it.
Excellent. Thank you for addressing that. All right. Well, we are going to, I think, wrap it up there. And answer a lot of these questions. Thank you for giving us such great food for thought as the, as we launch this series. We're very excited to be presenting, starting to present a lot of the research that we've completed for this project funded by EPA. So please feel free to reach out with any other questions that come up, and we really hope to see you at the other 3 webinars as well. So have a great rest of your afternoon, and thank you so much. Thank you to our speakers as well.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for coming.